I'd like to call the August 14th, 2014 meeting of Williamsburg City Council to order. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newton.
Aye. Here.
I'm here too. Mayor Holman.
Here.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Here.
Mr. Foster.
Here.
First order of business is council minutes from the July 1st, 2014 City Council organizational meeting and the July 10th, 2014 City Council meeting. Any additions or corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council approve the minutes from the July 1st, 2014 organizational meeting and the July 10th, 2014 meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Walton?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
We have no matters of special privilege today.
No, sir.
And no public hearings. So that brings us to the reports part of the meeting. First are the monthly financial statements. Jack, anything?
Just a couple of things to point out. Only 1 month into the fiscal year, but if you look on the third page where we have the capital improvement projects listed, you'll notice there that at this point the carryover funds don't appear, and that's because it takes some time to close out the prior fiscal year and know exactly what's going to be carried over in each account. So you'll see some, for instance, with Stryker Building, you'll see a $120,000 of expenditure, but no budget. But that's because that's part of the carryover money. And so by the time you get your report next month, you should see that column filled out. And the last thing on the last page, in fact, also related to Stryker project, at first glance, it looks like our balances are substantially higher than they were a year ago, but that's because of the bond proceeds column for the Stryker project, which now stands at $4.821 million. So that explains most of the reason why our fund balances are ahead of where they were 12 months ago. That's all I wanted to mention. Any
Thanks.
Questions or on the financial report?
Any questions, comments? Okay. If not, monthly department operating reports. Anything in particular, Jack?
Just one thing I thought I would point out, the Williamsburg Wayfinder app, by the last figures that we've received, 574 people have downloaded it off the Apple account, and for Google Play for the rest of the devices, 394. So people are finding it and downloading it, and that's a good sign.
Any questions on operating reports? If not, no planning reports.
We do have one. Mr. Nestor has something to say.
Reed, welcome.
I'm pleased to announce that the Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association recognized James City, City of Williamsburg, and York County with an outstanding regional planning process award, which you see here. That was presented at their annual conference this year. The reward is in recognition of the Historic Triangle Coordinated Comprehensive Plan review process that was a key part of our comprehensive plan update in 2012 and 2013. As you remember, this had been discussed by all three jurisdictions in the Regional Issues Committee since 2006. And the groundwork for this process was begun with resolutions adopted by the three governing bodies in 2008. We originally were thinking of 2010. We delayed it to 2012 to take advantage of more complete data from the 2000 census. So using our regional process as an integral part of our update, our plan was adopted in January of 2013. York County's plan was adopted in September of 2013. And since James City had a more recently adopted plan in 2009, the various components are being rolled into their current update process and are recognized as foundational documents for their update. So I think in retrospect it was a very worthwhile process, and I think all of us are pleased with the recognition we've received.
Well, congratulations, Reed, and I hope you'll convey to all the planning staff how much we appreciate their work, and you'll convey to the planning directors of James City and York and their staffs as well because this really was a team effort of 3 jurisdictions, and that doesn't happen very often. And I'd also like to thank Paul Freiling, who, as chair of the Regional Issues Committee, really pushed this and I think was important in making this happen. So once again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to add anything?
I'd just like to ask if what the plan is now for looking back at the process and determining what went really well, what went pretty well, and what didn't go as well as we would have hoped, and how we carry that forward into the future.
Of course, the 3 staffs have talked about those issues among themselves. We've done not a formal report on that, and I think when the county has completed its current process, that would probably be the time to think about what our next step is.
So, to me, one of the more interesting facets of the process was the joint community meetings where residents from all 3 jurisdictions were invited to come and speak on any matter related to the planning process, but trying to focus it on certain areas where the jurisdictions really cross over in fairly confined geography. And I learned a lot through that. And I hope those are the types of exchanges that we can continue to have going forward.
And if I may, one of the, as we went through that process, it was very good that there was joint communication amongst the 3 of us, but at no point, I think, did we jeopardize looking at our own comprehensive plans for the sake of the city, and I'm sure the counties did the same. So while we worked together, we still, maintained some autonomy and did what was in the best interest of our own community, with the others in mind, and joining and synchronizing where we could. So.
Anybody else? Well, Reed, congratulations. I think, again, this was a terrific effort. I think we all, as Paul and Doug suggested, I mean, there were lots of benefits from it, both for the region and for the localities as well. And again, I look forward to the next round. Thank you.
That's because you're not on the planning commission.
Right. Bingo. Okay. City manager reports. We have a number. The first is the biennial goals, initiatives, and outcome process.
Yes, sir. Jody Miller and I are going to brief council now both on the results of the National Citizen Survey that was administered in May, and then Jody will take that part, and then I'm going to talk about just a summary of the final assessment report of the 2013-2014 goals, initiatives, and outcomes, and that really, closes out that 2-year process, and then talk about the next few months and the schedule for the next few months as we begin to develop the 2015-2016 goals, initiatives, and outcomes statement. So in a sense, this meeting is the kickoff, the closeout of the kickoff of the next phase, and an open forum today is our first public opportunity now that the new process has started for anyone that wishes to comment. There'll be many other opportunities over the next few months for the public to do that. So to begin, I'll ask Jody if she'll talk about the National Citizen Survey.
Thank you, Jack. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. We are going to try to use our iPads in this presentation. Thank you, Jack. So I'm going to try to maneuver my iPad and provide information to you through the presentation. And when we're done talking about the citizen survey results, I'm going to hand it over to Jack to do the second part of the presentation. So it's my pleasure this afternoon to provide you with an overview of the 2014 Williamsburg National Citizen Survey results. The survey was conducted over a 6-week period in May and June of this past year, of 2014, this past spring. As you're aware, we conduct the survey every 2 years to align with the city's goals, initiatives, and outcomes process. The information that we receive from the survey provides us the best outcome data that we have to measure ourselves in our goals, initiatives, and outcomes process. Okay. And just as a reminder, A little bit of an overview of the survey itself. The survey is a collaboration between the National Research Center and ICMA. ICMA is the International City County Management Association. They provide a statistically valid survey of residents' opinions about their community and their services. So they put together the survey, they conduct the survey for us, do the analysis, and then send us the reports. Looking at the 2014 survey, we had a 31% response rate. That equaled 352 surveys that were completed and included in the results we're going to talk about this afternoon. Also, in this year's report, this is the 4th time we've conducted the National Citizen Survey. So we have 4 cycles of data to look at for our results. Part of the survey instrument also provides information on national benchmarks, and the benchmarks come from over 500 communities around the country that participate in the national survey. There are about 24 of those communities of the 500 are actually in Virginia. There are also a few differences, or in the 2014 survey, a few changes that I wanted to make you aware of, and I'll go a little bit deeper as we get further into the survey results, but this was the first year we were able to offer an online survey for residents. So if you were selected to participate, you had the option of either filling out the paper survey and mailing it back in, or they gave you a code where you could go on the National Research Center's website and you could complete the survey. We had 19 surveys completed online this year, and we also had 1 survey completed in Spanish, and this is also the first time we've offered a second language survey as well to our residents. There are new questions in the 2014 survey focused on more questions on community livability, also asking citizens to answer questions about their overall health and wellness. And just as they added some new questions this year, they also took out some questions that we've seen in previous survey results. And I'll show you on the report sort of that information. Where you see an NA meant that they no longer asked that question in the 2014 survey, so we don't have any results for that for this year. And finally, the last part, and this is probably the biggest change that we saw in this year's survey, is around the national benchmarks and the way they scored those. If you recall, in the past, it was either higher, similar, or lower. And this year, they widened the scale for similar and shrunk the higher and lower, which ultimately means it's really harder for communities to score higher than the benchmark or lower than the benchmark because of the way they changed that scoring. And you'll see some of that through the results. Okay. Here's a picture. It's a nice illustration of the locations of the survey recipients. So I mentioned we had a 31% response rate. We mailed out over 1,200 surveys. And so you have a sense as to those who were chosen to participate in the survey, sort of where they are in the city. The National Research Center works with the city's GIS office to make sure that all those included in the sample for the survey are actually within the city limits. So you can see that's why it's important, based on the information here, we're able to actually map it and track that data. As in years past, we've oversampled in multifamily residences. Research has proven that those are more challenging to get responses from, and because of our number of multifamily residents, they oversampled to make sure we received enough a response from residents living in multifamily to add as part of the overall sample and the results. They also weight the scores, and they weight the scores to make sure that it's reflective of our overall community, and they use information from the 2010 census data to do that. So for us, when they were looking at weighting the scores, the characteristics they looked at for weighting included housing tenure, housing unit type, race, sex, and age. Okay. So we've taken questions that relate to the different goal areas for each of the goals for the GIOs, and we've included them, in some cases updated them in your GIO's update report, but we've also added new questions that were new to the 2014 survey as part of each of the goal areas. So let me tell you a little bit about the new format that we have, and then I'll go over some highlights of some of the individual scores in each goal category. So as you can see, this is Goal Area 1, Character of the City. Move it up a little bit. We've got the 4 cycles of data where available. We've also got the national benchmark information. This year you'll see it represented in sort of an arrow format. If it's pointing up, it means it's higher than the benchmark. If it's pointing down, it's lower. And if it's sort of in the middle, it means similar. In addition to that, since we now have, for most questions, 4 years of data, we put together a trend line. And what you see under trend line is these little lines called spark lines. And it gives you sort of at a quick look, each individual question, sort of a sense of what the trend looks like for that question. So that's kind of a valuable tool, we thought, moving forward. As you'll see, towards the bottom of most of the pages where there are new questions for the 2014 survey, we've included those. And then in addition is the information just sort of at the bottom that gives you sort of, when it says a positive rating, it means excellent or good or equivalent. And then the higher, lower, or similar as far as the benchmark, with 2 arrows pointing up as being much higher and 2 arrows pointing down being much lower. So now that you have a sense of the format, let's dig a little bit deeper into some of the results.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You talk about the new questions and some questions going away. How much influence do we have on what questions are asked?
We don't have any.
None.
It's a standard product and tool, which can be a challenge, but also it provides us a way to measure ourselves also against other communities and to keep that data and information consistent as well. So that's one of the challenges with using this instrument. So looking at our 2014 results, things like the questions that were asked, residents were asked to rate overall quality of life in Williamsburg. You see 81% said excellent or good. And that's on par with the national benchmark. And remember I mentioned the way they've done the benchmark, the way they've equated that is somewhat different than they've done in the past, making that similar area a much bigger range. So in some cases you'll see a score change by a percentage or 2, and it may have been higher or lower in years past, but you'll find it to be similar to the benchmark for 2014 scores. We also have other scores to point out. Overall appearance of Williamsburg, 93% people said they thought it was excellent or good. You see that's above the national benchmark. Cleanliness of Williamsburg, above the benchmark, national benchmark at 89%. Overall quality of natural environment, 88%, also above the national benchmark. Just some of the things that we've included in this year's survey results as it relates to the GIOs. Also, if you look down, some of the new questions which are kind of interesting. People rating overall built environment in Williamsburg, 74% indicated excellent or good. And then a new question as well was public places in Williamsburg, 82% said excellent or good, and that's above the benchmark as well. Okay. So the next goal area is economic vitality. Once again, you'll see a similar format as you saw in the first goal area, and it's throughout the updated report. Things to point out here, which we found really interesting. Shopping opportunities seem to go up quite a bit to 82%, much higher than the national benchmark, which is kind of an interesting one to look at. Overall quality of businesses and services in Williamsburg went up quite a bit to 77%, had a positive rating for that. Williamsburg as a place to visit. Now this is a new question, and we had 93% of those who participated in the survey said excellent or good, and that's much higher than the benchmark. And I think that really speaks to our destination and people seeing us as an important destination. Overall economic health was also another question, a new question that was asked as part of the 2014 survey. 66% said excellent or good with that, on par with the national benchmark. A vibrant downtown and commercial area, 60% indicated positive or excellent. That's higher than the national benchmark. And I thought this was kind of interesting as well. Purchased goods and services in Williamsburg, 98% of those who took the survey said they had done that.
Does make you wonder who the other 2%
Yeah, right.
On to goal area 3, transportation. You'll see in this particular page, we had a lot more new questions that were available for this area than we had in previous surveys, and those are included toward the end of the page. Just looking at some scores to point out to you, the ones that stand out to me. Ease of car travel in Williamsburg, 73%, thought it was excellent or good. Ease of walking in Williamsburg, 82%, and we tend to be much higher than the national benchmark on that one as well. We've got a whole series of ratings on things like street repairs and cleanings and lighting. Snow removal is always kind of an interesting one, depending on what kind of winter we've had the previous year. Ease of travel in Williamsburg, ease of travel, overall travel is a new question you'll see towards the bottom. 75% said excellent or good, similar to the national benchmark. Use of public transportation instead of driving, this is also a new one, a new question, and this was kind of interesting. 28% said they had used public transportation instead of driving. And this question really speaks to when I said they added questions about community livability and overall health and wellness. You'll see some of the questions actually ask residents to report on their own behavior. Things like, are they using public transportation? Are they carpooling instead of driving alone? And so we've included some of those things as part of our update as well. And then the final thing, and this is above the national benchmark, is walk or bike to work instead of driving. 72% indicated they had. Public safety, goal area number 4. Looking at safety in Williamsburg's downtown commercial area, very high score, 95%, positive rating there. Safety in your neighborhood, 94% is another one. Safety and property crimes and violent crimes, those are no longer questions asked by the survey, and that's why you see the NA there. So you can see on both the safety questions in neighborhoods and the commercial areas, we score very, very high. We always do really well in our public safety services, and you'll see that as you glance down the page. Emergency preparedness was another one that's kind of interesting. 74% of those who took the survey rated us excellent or good in that area. A new question to the 2014 survey was asking residents to rate their overall feeling of safety, 93%. Those who've stocked up with emergency supplies, which is also a new question, which is kind of interesting. 49% of those who took the survey indicated they had done that, and that's higher than the national benchmark. Goal area number 4 under human services. It's human services and education. Looking at this briefly, 78% gave a positive rating to educational opportunities here in the city, which is higher than the national benchmark. 79% gave positive ratings for the public schools. One that went up really high was the availability of affordable health care, 72%. That's much higher than the national benchmark there. Also, we saw a pretty big jump in the availability of preventative health services as well. 73% indicated they were good or excellent. You'll see on this page, this is one of the pages where there were a number of questions that had been asked in the past, and they no longer ask those as part of the overall survey, so you see the NAs where that happens. But what they've done in some cases is they may not have asked the exact same question, but they've asked a question that's similar in content. So you'll see things like with health and wellness, mental health care, those kinds of things where the 2014 data is. We do have the results for that, and they've taken a little bit different approach to asking those types of questions. Also at the bottom of this page as well are more of those kind of questions which are self-reporting from residents. Things like 5 portions of fruits and vegetables each day. We're asking citizens to report on that. Participate in a moderate amount or vigorous amount of physical activity. Rate themselves in very good to excellent health. These once again speak to that whole community livability, health and wellness approach that this 2014 survey has. Okay. Next goal looks at recreation and culture. 75% had a positive rating for the recreational opportunities in the city. 92% rated our parks as excellent or good. One that sticks out to me here as well is the opportunities to attend cultural activities. 79% rated those excellent or good, and that's above the national benchmark. Our library services always have great scores, 93% rated services as excellent or good. Availability of walking trails, 70%. And as you can see towards the bottom of the page, once again, it's asking about individual behavior. It's asking not only do you like our centers, but have you used them? Have you visited a city park? Have you used the public library? And the scores for those as well. Okay. Goal 7 is environmental sustainability. This one includes a whole list of city services, everything from sewer services to recycling, garbage collection. You'll see, and this is an interesting one, we just implemented a new recycling program about the same time the survey was conducted. And so we've seen a little bit of a dip in that for 2014 scores. It'll be interesting to see 2 years from now where that score goes. Still rather high at 71%, but I think that's a good example of how sometimes what's going on when the survey's happening may influence the scores for the survey. And you can see that with the garbage collection. We made a change in the garbage collection program a number of years ago. It sort of dipped down a little bit, but it's rebounded pretty nicely. There are also new questions on the survey that we added to this page that seem to make sense, things regarding open space and utility billing, and we also residents responding to whether or not they conserve water, whether they did something to make their home more energy efficient, and whether they actually recycled at home. And the final goal, goal area 8, is citizen engagement and city governance. This is the goal area where we probably had the most number of new questions added, and it actually went over to a whole other half page. But it includes scores for things like value of services for taxes paid to Williamsburg. 73% of those who took the survey and had a positive rating for that, either excellent or good, and that's higher than the national benchmark. Other questions included in this area are overall image or reputation of Williamsburg. 87% had a positive rating for that, higher than the national benchmark as well. As we go further down, one of the series of questions they did take out, which we particularly liked, was citizens' interaction with city employees. And so you'll see on this page we have a few NAs where those questions are no longer asked as part of the survey. What they essentially do now is just ask the one question about overall impression of city employees. 82% had a positive rating for that. And then services provided by the city, 83% also had a positive rating for that. And I'll take you to the next page. Some new questions included in this section include special events. 71% of those who took the survey had a positive rating for special events in the city. And then as you look further down this list, it really speaks more to behavioral type questions. It asked residents whether they'd volunteered, they had talked to or visited a neighbor, had done a favor for a neighbor, attended or watched a public meeting, or voted in the last election. And then the final thing I wanted to briefly talk to you about was, in addition to the standard questions that we just went over in the survey, they do allow you to come up with a custom question or two to add to the survey that's specific to your community. In the past 3 years, we have kept the same question in order to get some sense as to whether those who took the survey, how they thought we were doing as far as reaching our vision statement. And so here are the 2014 scores. And we broke the vision statement up into 3 areas, and then the final part was asking citizens whether or not overall they felt like the city was fulfilling its vision. So looking at the first part, Williamsburg is a safe, beautiful, livable city. We had 96% strongly agree or somewhat agree with that statement. Government is cohesively led, financially strong, and always improving. 77% strongly agreed or somewhat agreed with that. Operates in full partnership with the people who live, work, and visit here. 69% strongly agreed or somewhat agreed. And for the final piece of that, the overall the city is fulfilling its vision. 81% of those who took the survey strongly agreed or somewhat agreed with that. So that is my portion of the presentation on the 2014 citizen surveys. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Jody, thank you. This is a lot of information, as we know, but also useful. Let me turn to council, and then I have a couple more technical questions.
I just have one comment I'd like to make. Could you take us to the page where we have the first set of data or responses? And one of the things I think we should be aware of is that the trend line is helpful, but it doesn't tell us that much all by itself. And if you take, for example, the two different categories, one is cleanliness of the city. The overall spread of that is a total of 3 percentage points, but it looks like it goes up and down pretty well. But then if you look at the quality of new development, the overall spread there is 12 percentage points. But you don't, because you don't have quite the comparable scale. So I think that the trend line is useful, but it's really helpful to view it in the context of the real numbers.
Yeah, that's one of my, if I may, one of my comments was I think that it has pluses and minuses, and the minus Paul has pointed out, I think, is really important, where what did you call them?
Spark lines.
Spark lines.
Spark lines.
That they really do mislead in many ways, because they show significant changes when in fact it may be 1 or 2 points. And so it's a problem with scale.
Well, I take responsibility for it. I like to, but it is an Excel program, so you kind of get what Excel is.
No, I see the reason to do it, but it also can be misleading.
It shows the greater change when there's not, and it doesn't show the great change when there's
That's
busy.
right,
Yes, true.
Sorry for.
Oh, no, that's fine. The other question I have, and I'm just not sure I understand the weighting concept of how certain responses are counted differently depending upon the demographics of the respondee.
Yes. And that's a technique that's done in statistical research to make sure that the results that are being presented. Oops.
Wait, are you this?
First.
To make sure that the results that are being presented are representative of the overall demographics in a community. And so for us, we skewed somewhat differently in things like age, gender, housing type, length of stay in a community. And so they run the process through the analysis, doing the weighting of the data to make sure that when we look at those results, and they give us about a 95% confidence rate, that that's truly reflective of sort of the overall community profile.
Jody, when you look at the numbers and you have the column for the national benchmark, there's the arrows going right to left, up and down, 2 up, 2 down. What's the standard deviation there that keeps, is it every 5 points, in looking at one, special events, we're rated at 71%, which is within line of the national benchmark. If we were at 69, would we be below?
Right. The guidance they gave us on the new technique for the benchmarking is about 10%, which is wider than it had been in the past.
Percentage points or?
Percentage
Yes.
points.
Okay,
Percentage
so
points.
that's pretty broad.
So the one that surprised me was the library, which we had something like 93% of the people.
And you're similar.
And we're right at the benchmark. We all know our library's better.
And I mean, what that leads to is, if I may, a question about, would they be willing to provide us with standard deviations on these questions, particularly some of these that are important to us, so we can look at them a little bit more
I can certainly
closely?
ask.
And could they also, this survey is given to all sorts of communities, cities with millions of people down to cities even smaller than Williamsburg. The real benchmark I would be more interested in is communities similar to us. So could they present those benchmarks for communities within a certain range, say 5,000 to 25,000? That would tell us a whole lot more than the national benchmark, which has
500
Well,
communities.
yeah, right. You know, lots of big cities and stuff in it that have no relations whatsoever to kinds of things we do. So I wonder whether those sorts of things are
Well,
possible.
And on that same line, for instance, communities that are, say, 90+% single-family
That's right.
communities are very different from a community which is, we're over 50% rental.
Right.
And College Town different from a rural community. And all. We could see what more they can give us. I think they're particularly sensitive about this because they know it all becomes public information, and they don't want any particular community being put at being made to look at a disadvantage. And so it's kind of tricky, but we'll get as much as we can from it.
But the standard deviations in particular would be important because as we look at where there are changes, if we drop a couple points, is that really, you know, I mean, they say 10, but, you know, that's sort of what they're saying isn't very helpful in terms of, whereas if we could look at it more closely, we might be able to see
A little deeper.
exactly what's going on there.
I agree.
We do know, and Jody and I have talked about this a good deal, they're saying their range of when you get a statistically significant difference is actually 7 points above or below, which is pretty broad.
Yeah, right.
So that means if you get a 3 or 4% change, or percentage point change up or down, you really can't tell much from that, and most of our changes are in that more narrow range. And that also just a limitation of how accurate they're prepared to say this is statistically.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. No, thank you. The other observation that I see is, you know, where we rank with a very low percentage, you know, attend a local meeting, it's only 20%. You know, that might cause you to have some alarm, but it's within the national benchmark, and so it's pretty average. About the only thing that I see that we fell below the national benchmark is people watching public meetings, and I don't know what that says about us.
Dull and boring.
Dull and boring, right. That's all I have.
In years past, you've talked a little bit about concern that these numbers reflect experiences that go on outside our jurisdiction. How will we try to control for that?
Well, we do know there are residents answering the question.
Okay.
Whether their perception of local government is more general than just the city of Williamsburg, that is very hard to control.
Right.
If they, for instance, feel that the development is not what they want to see, they may be thinking about development outside the city is in. There's no way really to deal with that other than be aware of the kind of questions that might be likely to be at play.
The shopping is probably the same issue. No, I don't have any other questions.
Anybody else have any further questions?
You know, what can we take out of this? A fairly consistent resident experience over the last 6 years, but look at the last question. We voted in local elections, 85% of the people.
Told you they voted in the last question.
You know,
Self-reporting's not
Yeah,
that reliable.
Yes, right.
That's the way I felt
Problem
about
with
the fried
surveys.
vegetables.
Yeah.
not that the last
They also
local
eat
election
their
wasn't
fruit
thrilling.
It was a nail biter.
Okay,
Anything?
we're
Okay.
going to shift now from the citizen survey to the rest of the assessment, and so I'm not going to say anything about the column on the right, because that's what we've just been through. But just to point out a couple of things, and again, the full report, the full final assessment takes each one of the initiatives and does a paragraph or two on where we stand on that vis-a-vis where we said we wanted to be. And just to, again, point out a few highlights, under character of the city, these were the initiatives that were put into the GIOs 2 years ago. The first one certainly we can check off as being accomplished, and Reed just gave you the report in terms of the award won on the joint comprehensive plan. The last 5 are all different areas of the city, and we go into some detail in the report of just what we've seen in each of those areas in terms of the building, the character of the city, area by area. And again, so I'm not going to try to go through every one of those, but I think it's a good, useful way of doing it to kind of get a sense of how that area has changed for the better or for worse during this period of time. Also, under character of the city, we have the categories of corridor beautification, open space preservation. On both of those, we have corridor beautification. The major project that's been accomplished over the last 2 years has been the Page Street underground wiring project between the historic area out to the Colonial Parkway, and obviously the downtown project on Prince George Street. Open space preservation, over the last 2 years, we have not bought additional open space, although there is one opportunity pending now. Merrimack Trail, quite a bit of focus over the last 2 years from all departments of the city, public safety, human services, to provide services in that area and engage with it as much as we can. We've seen some good results in terms of some of the crime statistics in that area, and the police are tracking it pretty closely. Neighborhood relations and neighborhood preservation near the college. We talk about the work of the NRC over the last 2 years. And then finally, the Citizens Committee on Community Wellness. That was the one where we've not gotten as far down the road with that as we would have liked to have seen 2 years ago in terms of the functioning of the group, although there are a couple of initiatives that are going on right now with the Community Health Foundation that are very promising. So there's actually been a lot of work in that area. There's not too much under the auspices of that committee. Shifting to economic vitality, Economic Development Strategic Plan that was adopted back in December of 2012, and part of that was the diversification strategies. We've seen a very active 2 years in that area. The launch of the regional incubator, the arts district formation, and the formation of the business association in the arts district, Arts Month expansion, the demolition loan program, the e-government loan program. So there are lots of examples of things the city's done in that area that I think merits the blue block, which means either completed or on target. Targeted redevelopment opportunities ongoing. A lot of encouraging things there, such as the Lord Pageant arrangement, a lot of what we've seen on 2nd Street. Again, some progress there with plenty of opportunity for more things that need to happen. And finally, under destination tourism promotion, the last 2 years have been a significant change in the structure of the WADMAC and the Memorandum of Understanding with the Alliance, and how we do that business has been a significant change over the past 2 years, significant progress. And now we're all waiting to see to the extent it's going to be a game changer in terms of outcomes. Another indicator on the key outcome measures, the second one down, the increased amount of retail sales relative to city population. We've seen that starting to come up. It's been growing at about 1.5% since the bottom of the recession. Again, not the kind of pace of growth or extent of growth we want to see, but moving in the right direction. Some of the other indicators have not shown that positive trend, as we're all pretty well aware. The next one is transportation. We've got major sidewalk expansion projects have either just completed or still in process, and I think you're all familiar with most of those. Battery Boulevard was opened a year ago now, and we've received the bike-friendly community designation, thanks to Mr. Nestor's good work on that. We've completed the Prince George Street and Streetscape project, and the Route 60 East Corridor improvements, that's been fully funded. The plan for that's complete. It's the community meetings have been held with all the owners up and down that stretch, and it's ready to go out to bid. So that work will be completed in the next 6 to 8 months. And I already mentioned Page Street. So I think we can point to a lot of good work in the area of transportation. Public safety, again, if we look down the list, will see that most of these initiatives have been completed, and we've continued progress. And for instance, in the first area, community engagement for public safety, the school resource officer work at Governor Berkeley and the training of additional new resource officers there, a strong citizen emergency response or CERT program. 23 new folks have been indoctrinated into that. There are now some 99 citizens that have received training and are active in the program. Another one that's been quiet but it's ongoing and making real progress is public safety physical fitness. They work both in police and fire to do annual assessment, know exactly where every one of our public safety either sworn or certified folks are, whether they're meeting the full physical standards, whether they're not, or they're in a marginal situation. So really a good work has been done in that area. And finally, the last one is emergency public information enhancements. The most notable thing there is the Everbridge system that was put in place, went live a year ago now. It's been used on a number of occasions for notifications, both for citizens and also for city staff in emergencies, and that system has been proven to be effective. So I'd say overall, the initiatives in public safety, we can point to good progress in what we wanted to achieve. If we look at human services and education, the March 2023 MOU between the council and the housing authority and the integration of the two, the blended system, as we're calling it, I think has been a major leap ahead over the last 2 years. And the Bladen Elderly Housing Expansion Project, you all rezoned that to LV1 not too long ago after the completion of the comp plan, setting the stage eventually to do something significant on the Bladen site and provide for expanded elderly housing care. There's also, we're working with community planning partners to come up with specific strategies to take that to the next step. So progress made there, but it still has a long way to go to accomplishment. And the other areas, as you can read through in the report, youth achievement, senior services, homeless intervention and prevention, SNAP at the farmers market, all of these, I think you can be proud of the progress that has been made in them over the last 2 years. School facility improvements, the three bodies have not figured that one out yet. We are still working on what the next step's going to be for both central office and fourth middle school issues, so that one is still pending action. In recreation and culture, again, if you look down the list, it's pretty impressive what's been accomplished over the last few years. Unfortunately, we can't say that the permanent saving of the country road has yet been figured out between the city and the county and Colonial Williamsburg, which still owns that property. But the opportunity is still there. We need to keep working on it to accomplish that. But all the way down the line, the sports tourism thing has been pretty significant, and particularly in terms of what the city has done in the recreation department to develop that. Improvements in any number of parks, Great City Walks app, all good. We have an agreement to lease this Century Gallery, the site in City Square, although we haven't moved to a full lease yet, not ready for that, but we've taken what steps we can, and we've decided the future of the quarter path pool. So again, overall, I think we can point to a lot of accomplishment in that area. Environmental sustainability. Again, when you look down the list, we've completed or we've met the targets on all of the initiatives that are laid out in the GIOs and the outcome measures as well. The one I think is particularly significant is we have done everything the city needed to do to be in full compliance with the new stormwater management regulations and laws. That's been very well done by the city staff, the Public Works Department in particular. And also on the wastewater treatment issue, that was a huge question 2 years ago. That regional issue has been resolved. Of course, we were just one of many players in that. Voluntary residential refuge collection is an area where we've had a number of neighborhoods voluntarily go to curbside, several more this fall that are going to that direction. And again, Public Works continues to work neighborhood by neighborhood for those neighborhoods where it makes good sense and the communities want it. So we've done that. We've obviously done the recycling expansion of the program, allowing more recycling, and you're all very familiar with that. And finally, under citizen engagement, the Stryker project interim agreement phase will be back to you either September or October at the latest with the comprehensive agreement to move ahead. And you've just had your briefing on that last council meeting, so I know you're well aware of where that stands. Community engagement, a lot of specific items mentioned in the report on what's been done to enhance our level of engagement, communication, two-way, and some good work there. Performance management system. The first two here, B and C, are mainly externally focused, and then D, E, F, and G are internally focused issues where we've done what we said we needed to do 2 years ago. Employee succession, performance management system, a lot of good work there. Employee health and wellness, still opportunity for improvement, but some good indicators in terms of what we're paying now in terms of health insurance versus the kind of growth we were facing 2 years ago. And finally, we did adopt a leadership philosophy statement internally, and that's now on the books. So, again, quick run through. I didn't say much about all the outcome measures. I didn't say much about a lot of them, but I don't want to overdo it. But I did want to hit some highlights. And so, any comments or questions?
Thank you, Jack. Any questions?
No, I think this is a valuable resource in terms of monitoring how we progress with things, and again, it's a way for us to see trends, to see how our efforts are paying out or not, or paying off or not paying off, and affords us then the opportunity to make adjustments. And so, I'm pleased that we have this type of process going.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that, and I agree totally. I mean, I think over the years I've been on council, I think we've really seen changes in the way information is provided and the context in which we can help make decisions. And I think a lot of credit goes to our city manager, assistant city manager, but to all the staff, because this doesn't happen just because we want it to. There are a lot of people that put a lot of effort into it, and I think it provides an exceptionally useful framework for us as council to think about what we're doing, how we're doing, and what do we need to do in the future to do it even better. So thank you guys for this.
And that actually leads into the next piece, which is the schedule going forward. And after today, the next thing that will happen will be the City Council retreat on September 6th. That is a time for Council to begin the GIO process, and particularly thinking about the key initiatives for the future, what you want to focus on, and then we as a staff pick up on a lot of the things that come out of that to begin working on how those initiatives can be styled, looking toward the next 2 years. Right after the Monday following the retreat, we'll have another work session like this, and it will be to take what we do in the retreat, have some further discussion with council and with staff, and the idea here, I'd like to see all of our department heads and key staff in the room and find a way to have more of a dialogue in these areas at that level. And then on the September 11th, which is the date of the council meeting in the afternoon, that evening, that's our date that we've set aside for the public workshop. We have a system now. We will have the ability to do immediate interactive polling during that. So the idea is to ask lots of questions, get immediate feedback from everyone who attends. And where I think that's particularly helpful is trying to sort out priorities. What is most important in people's minds and what is of lesser importance, because you can't do everything. So what comes to the top of the list? But then also to solicit ideas and, oh, have you thought about this at that meeting? So that's always an important meeting, and I think it will be this time as well. Then we get into October. The council week in October will give us an opportunity to, by that time, we will have a first draft of the next set of GIOs. It's rough. It's not complete by any means, but it's something on paper to work with and to get public comment and to have council give further direction in October. And it gives us enough that we can put together a second draft that's getting toward a final draft to bring to you at your November work session, with the goal of having council ready to adopt the new GIOs at their November council meeting. And following week, we do the biannual State of the City event, where the mayor delivers in the form of an address the key points, the high points of where we are now and where the city is going as a result of this process. And then we go right into budget, and off we go.
Thanks. Any questions for Jack on the timing and process? And again, we'll make a real effort to get information about the September 11th meeting out to the public and try to increase public participation in that. And we'll use some of the technology like we used last time around with the...
And I didn't mention, but also through communications, we'll be working on getting all this matter out online in a way that makes it easy for people to participate online as well.
Okay. Terrific. Any questions? Okay, well, fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be an interesting couple months ahead. Okay. Next city manager report is the Economic Development Incentive Policy.
Yes, sir. Let me catch up with myself here. Here we go. Okay. Michelle, where are you? Please give this report.
And my eyes are still adjusting to this.
Well, good
Welcome.
afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of council.
It's interesting, Jack reviewing the biennial goals, and one of them was to develop an incentives policy, particularly around a deal closing fund. So here I am to tell you what the EDA recommends. To tell you a little bit about the EDA's process over the past 2 years, they spent time studying business trends, as we always do, talking to our existing businesses. We studied what our neighbors are doing. We also looked at best practices, state and nationwide. We talked to businesses who have received incentives elsewhere and how that worked for them, and had learned a lot from all of those things. And then our job was to look at that and see how that applies to our city and the way we operate here. So what you see in front of you is that recommended policy. And at its core, it talks about the fact that that private business should not be subsidized with public funds unless that subsidization can reasonably be expected to make a difference and to fill the city's goals. And we talk about those goals being economic growth, development, and vitality, expanding and diversifying the tax base, and creating new quality jobs. So at the end of the day, we want to have a more vibrant city that's economically sound and helps our citizens create wealth and helps them do better. So that really, as you're thinking about incentives, I think that's something good to always keep in mind. The EDA discussed some incentive policies are set up in a way that they're very formulaic, and so any business who moves into your jurisdiction, if they meet certain thresholds, they get a check, and that's not what the EDA feels is the city's philosophy. We really want to be the deal closing fund. If funds, which are limited, are used, it needs to really make a difference to get a business here that would not normally come. Having said that, we also outlined some criteria of how you can judge. Once you've decided that, but for this incentive, the business wouldn't come, which is subjective, to be honest. But then we did want some qualitative or quantitative items to look at. The first is just that business would match the city's goals and purpose in terms of economic development. The second one talks about that but for, that the business would not come without those incentives. Thirdly, that the business has demonstrated stability and financial projections that looks like they can complete the project they're talking about. So they've demonstrated a capacity to do that. And then looking at what the local tax revenue, the return on investment that would come off of that business, and we took it out to a 5-year window. Between 3 and 5 years is best practice. So we looked at saying we wouldn't give a cash or a loan or an incentive that was valued more than what that business would pay in direct tax bills over a 5-year period. And you'll remember I talked about that a lot with the Copper Fox project, and we looked at what they would do and what they projected they would do in a 5-year period. And then lastly, that the EDA would, based on the plan that City Council adopts in our diversification goals, have a set of targeted businesses that they're looking for, and those are outlined on a handout in your packet, and I'll go over that in a minute. Then there's two last things that are important. One, to I would say any city or county giving incentives, there needs to be a clawback, what's commonly called a clawback agreement, which is if the business would sign an agreement saying, if I do not do what I said I would do, if I don't invest, I don't open, I don't pay taxes, I don't hire people, whatever those parameters are, I will need to give that money back to the city. That's standard statewide here in Virginia, and it's just a good practice. And then secondly, the EDA realized this is the first time Williamsburg is getting into this game, and we want everyone to be comfortable. So most EDAs don't have a limit other than how much money they have from their council, their board, or other revenue sources as to how large an incentive would be. But talking to York County, our neighbor, they have a $100,000 threshold that they then take a project to City Council, or for them it's their Board of Supervisors. So we mimicked that and said, this is brand new here in the city of Williamsburg, so if anything is valued at more than $100,000, we can take it to City Council to get a nod on whether to proceed. That would all be done in closed session because it would be a economic development prospect that's confidential at that point. But we wanted your involvement at that level is what the EDA felt. So having gone over that, I'll hit the highlights. This is on the third page in your package, and this was just designed to be something that businesses would actually see in terms of what the EDA is looking for incentives. And you'll see we listed targeted industries, and these shouldn't surprise anyone. We started out with our existing businesses. They are the most important revenue and job creators that we'll have. Typically, at least 80% of your growth comes from your existing businesses. And again, these shouldn't surprise you. We talked about corporate and regional headquarters, contemporary hospitality, what the visitors want to experience when they come here, distilling and brewing, destination retail, research and development, health and medical related, creative economy, which y'all are familiar with our arts district incentives, and tourist attractions. And then the guidelines are outlined so that a business, it would be clear to a business what they're looking at, but the analysis would be done by the EDA, and again, if it was over $100,000, which would be fairly rare, unless it was again, remember there's that 5-year tax payback that we're looking at as well, that would come to City Council for their review as well. Happy to answer any questions.
Michelle, thank you, and again, convey our thanks to the EDA for all the work that's gone into this. I know they've spent a lot of hours talking about this and a lot of research went into it, so thank you very much. We appreciate that. Paul, you're on liaison to EDA. You've been intimately involved in this discussion, so maybe you could lead off with some questions or comments.
Well, I'll make a few comments, and I just want to emphasize that as the council's liaison to the EDA, I'm often just an observer of their discussion. I try not to get involved in the specifics of what it is they're trying to develop, but when they have questions about process or questions about how might council view something, obviously I can't speak for council, but I do my best to convey to them a sense of, you might consider option A over option B if you want to get something passed. A couple of points I'd like to emphasize that Michelle has already made. I think the key to this is what the EDA would call the but-for concept, that the business would not happen but for the presence of this incentive. And $250,000 is a lot of money for the city for an initial investment in economic development incentives. But when you look at spreading that money across businesses that could come in the community, it's not a huge amount of money. So we're not talking about a business that is going to be financially unstable without the city's help. It's a business that is almost at the point where they can do it on their own, but they just need a little bit of help to push them over the edge. And I think it's worth noting that both the payback concept and the clawback clause are concepts that we already use in the demolition program. The demolition grant is forgivable over a period of time if the incremental tax revenue over that period exceeds the amount of the original loan. And likewise with the clawback, if a demolition loan is granted and then the demolisher does not then follow through on their promise to rebuild and then generate that incremental tax revenue, then we have a way of getting that money back. So I think those are important parts to keep in mind. And the other is the flexibility that's intentionally built into this. It keeps us away from a specific set of guidelines, as Michelle mentioned, where if you meet qualification, 2 qualifications in this bucket, 3 qualifications in this bucket, and 2 in this bucket, you automatically are then eligible for this much money. Because there are a number of businesses that honestly don't need the help to get going, but would be happy to take advantage of the money if we made it freely available. But given our limited resources, it's just not practical for the EDA to do. So they're trying to identify those key projects that have a great prospect for success, but just need a little bit of help getting started.
Yep, that's helpful. Thank you. Scott, any questions, comments?
I like to select how this is tailored to fit our needs and our budget. A lot of those localities that have the type of incentives Paul just described have a tax rate that's more than double ours. So the cost of doing business here is already relatively low.
Doug?
Just curious, as the threshold of 100,000, how was that picked? I mean, as you pointed out, it's rare that would be given out. So how did we come up with that number?
Right. York County uses that threshold and so to be honest, we borrowed from our sister county because we felt that just starting out in the incentive game, that council and the EDA itself had more comfort in the fact that there was when we reached that threshold, it would be discussed with you.
Right. Okay, thank you. You mentioned all existing businesses would have this opportunity. I mean, are there some businesses that wouldn't have the opportunity, like a non-contemporary hospitality type business?
I think maybe they'd be converting to become more contemporary. I don't know. So I think it's a case-by-case basis. So existing businesses are important, though I will say they wouldn't be eligible for incentives unless they were expanding in order to create that increased tax. So their existing tax payments wouldn't be calculated. It would be any new taxes they would pay in terms of that 5-year ROI.
So it could be an existing hospitality type business.
Certainly.
Beyond not being contemporary.
Sure, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I guess contemporary can mean different things. We were thinking to make it a product that the visitors want, but that doesn't mean it's a brand new building.
Sure.
So I guess that.
Sure. So because we have this pool of money to invest, I think what the EDA is working on, I think, is a good good starting point. It's a little bit different than what we offer in the Arts District. Was there any conversation at the EDA about expanding that type of tax benefit to the rest of the community as an incentive where somebody, as Vice Mayor Freiling pointed out, may not need the cash, but just may need a little extra help. But if they had the opportunity to take advantage of the escalating beef poll tax, that might be more of an incentive. So I wonder if offering that to the rest of the business community was discussed, and what was the findings?
Sure. So a couple things on that point. It's definitely been discussed, and we're hopeful that we'll get the enterprise zone approval, although, it's very competitive. But the enterprise zone local incentives were based almost entirely on that concept, that it's a rebate of taxes that you pay, just like the Arts District. This pool is different because it allows cash to be paid up front, which businesses like a lot more better than, that was
You're speaking like me,
improper English. Businesses really like. No, but businesses would prefer to have cash initially to invest, whereas the Arts District program, you receive it a year later after you pay your taxes. So we felt this was a much stronger incentive program that the business community would react to.
How would you all, when you begin to estimate, let's say we have a new business concept coming to town and it's a research and development. Obviously, there's some projections of what tax benefit they would be. How do you validate those, from what the entrepreneurs presenting to you as the EDA to make sure that those numbers really jive?
Sure. So I think there's two prongs to that. One is it would need to come with a financial and a business plan that would be analyzed by the EDA, and you do have the expertise on the EDA, varied expertise that could really look at that and say, is this realistic? And then are those projections, is the pro forma realistic based on their business plan? And then secondly, that clawback agreement is a very businesses tend to be conservative on their projections when they realize if they don't meet them, they will have to pay the money back. So the state runs their programs that way, and having discussions with businesses about that, they tend to lower their numbers when they realize that there's a clawback.
That's all the questions I have, but just as a general comment, I think what the EDA is presenting is exactly what we hoped would come from making this investment of $250,000 to the EDA, so that they can evaluate, business opportunities, and we wouldn't lose that opportunity for the sake of a few dollars. And hopefully it generates new business and revitalizes some of the existing businesses.
And if I could go back to your earlier question, Councilman Pons, about the contemporary hospitality versus the existing business, I think another way to look at that was if someone came in and built a new hospitality facility that would compete with our existing businesses, I think that's more of the contemporary. It doesn't differentiate itself enough to be a game changer, but the hotels would stand alone as an existing city business who's eligible for incentives. So I don't see them, if I'm understanding your question correct, I don't see them having to convert to a contemporary hotel in order to qualify. Does that make, it's an either, I think it could be an either or.
Sure. You answered the question.
Okay, all right.
I don't really have a question for Michelle, just a comment. I have to admit, at the beginning of this process, I was a little bit skeptical because of some past experience of my own and because of some things I've read. And I think this is a really good outcome. It answers the questions I had about the problems that I've seen in the past, and I think it makes a lot of sense for the city, so I'm pleased to see it. So thank the EDA for it.
Yeah, again, I think that's, a lot of work has gone into this, and it shows. I guess two quick questions. One, the Arts District type incentives, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that that's because we designated that, and the General Assembly allowed us to designate a particular area, but we couldn't do that citywide unless we get the enterprise zone designation. Is that correct?
There's a handful of tools, just a few tools that the General Assembly gives you that you could do that. So I wouldn't advise it, it wouldn't make sense, but you could make the whole city an arts district,
Yeah, right, yeah.
and then you could do that. But you're correct, the Constitution requires uniform taxation to all businesses, so the General Assembly has to say you're allowed to designate certain areas for good reason,
yeah, right.
which you did in the arts district and would happen with the enterprise. So, no.
Okay, yes. And back to, yeah, I'm not sure I like the contemporary hospitality
Okay.
designation. I really, you may want to think a little bit more, because I think, to me, it was confusing, and I think now I get a sense of what you're driving at, but I'm not sure contemporary is the right sort of modifier for that. So you may want to think about that a little bit.
I agree. We will do that because,
Yeah.
to what I was trying to say earlier, because we don't need to bring in more hotels to compete with our existing hotels. So the thought was it needed to be something pretty special and extraordinary. So
Well,
we do need to work on that.
Right, and so, and I guess if I may.
Yeah, please.
I would hate to say to our existing businesses that, no, you don't qualify for this
Right.
because you're not deemed contemporary. There's examples all over the country where there are older motel-style properties
Right.
that are very successful and could be in this market. And there's
Right.
lots of factors that may make them struggle today. And so I wouldn't want to disqualify them automatically based on
Sure.
verbiage here.
And that makes sense, and I think we do need to change that wording.
Yeah, just, if I can just add something, the very first targeted industry is existing city businesses. So there's a recognition that if you are already doing business here, you're a valued prospect for expansion or growth, and we love having you here. Where I think the EDA was going was, how do you differentiate product, or how do you differentiate a service or any kind of business when you have a potentially saturated market, and you don't want to bring just in just one more business like all the ones you already have and pay to get that business in and then cut that same pie smaller. So the hope is and a lot of this is judgment-based. It's not scientific, but looking at what the business can bring to the table that provides something that we don't already have in this community that will draw in more business as opposed to cut up the pie. The other thing I think you touched on is the business plan analysis is also judgment, because there's no guarantee, no matter how detailed the business plan is, there's no protection against a bad product. If somebody opens a business and they don't follow through on the service side, or they don't pay attention to the quality of the product, or they don't market themselves, they run the risk of failure. And so the business plan analysis can only take us so far, but they're going to do the best job they can in determining that.
Yeah, and I think the current EDA and the executive director, will do all that they can to make sure that I feel that there's a good body there that will help scrutinize these opportunities that present themselves and will do well. Then beyond that, this EDA won't be here forever, and this council won't,
Right.
but I think
This program might not be.
it may not. And so that kind of went to my question about the threshold. If the threshold's too big and the money's gone, and the programs don't, anyway. So I think that there's, the way I see this plan, and the way it's laid out, there's safeguards in there that good decisions are made.
And I think the two things that make me most comfortable with this are the 100,000 limit, and I could have that at 50 or 75 or 100, but, at some level, it comes to council for further consideration. And the 60-month tax rule really does provide a limit, I think. And so both of those give me some comfort in thinking about, this isn't open-ended. This really does, there are limits. And then back to the former discussion, this is judgment in lots of ways, but that's why we have an EDA. That's why we have the kinds of people and the skills that we have on the EDA, and we hire a very skilled economic development director to help make that analysis for us. Any other questions, comments? Paul, since this is your Billy, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, I move the council adopt the attached Economic Development Incentives Policy Program to govern the EDA's use of current and future economic development incentive funding.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please? Ms. Walton?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
President Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Michelle, again, thank you, and I hope you will express our thanks to EDA, because a lot of work went into this, and it's paid off, so thank you very much. Now we have to see this next payoff, so thank you very much. Okay. Our next next report is redistricting reform. Jack?
Yes, sir. This report kind of gets a jump on our legislative agenda for the year by considering an issue that has long-term significance to the state and to the country, and that is legislative redistricting. The next redistricting, of course, will occur after the 2020 census. And there has been an organization formed called One Virginia 2021, Virginians for Fair Redistricting. They've reached out to localities around the state and any other groups to trying to garner support for a reform in the way Virginia does its legislative redistricting, that without prescribing a specific agenda, but rather more generally that along certain principles that needs to be done, and that in order designed to make redistricting more trustworthy and accountable, and create a more healthy democracy, following the time-tested principles of compact districts, contiguous districts, districts which have a community of interests that don't relate to partisan politics, but to those three things. So the resolution would, again, without being specific about how it would be done, put the council in a position to say that it supports and promotes legislative redistricting reform in Virginia, and the work that's being done by One Virginia 2021.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
I'll make a couple of comments. I'm actually borrowing this from Mr. Pons, and that it's a comment and a rhetorical question. Can you really take the politics out of redistricting? Well, to some degree, maybe not. Well, maybe you can't do it completely, but you can certainly make it less political than it currently is. And one of the more compelling arguments in the article is the concept that uncontested elections drive ideologies to the extreme. And that makes compromise in a larger governing body that much more difficult. And I think we've seen the results of that through inaction on a number of fronts, both at the state level and at the national level. And it is not helping the country, it's not helping the Commonwealth, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And if we don't have elections where the candidates appeal to the entire electorate, they're not accountable to the entire electorate. And that is another problem that flies in the face of the founding principles of this country. And no party has a monopoly on this. Each side is as guilty as the other, and we see it swing back and forth. And I don't know that our adopting anything here today is going to make that much of a difference, but I'd like to at least do the right thing, and I believe this is it.
Thanks.
I
Scott?
agree completely with Paul. You know, as an undergrad student of government, you can see this happen over time, and the outcome is really what we have today. And my personal opinion, it's not good. So, again, I agree that this resolution may not make one iota of difference, but it's important that we make our opinion on this heard. So.
Thanks. Doug?
You know, there's no question that what we've seen in the last redistricting, you know, what it did for Williamsburg and taking, you know, splitting the state senators and the delegates, and, you know, we once represented by Delegate Barlow, you know, on the Surrey side of the water, and it was kind of awkward for him, and maybe for us. And so there's no question that the way the lines are drawn probably don't serve the communities as well as they should, and that's driven by politics. And so there is, I think, an opportunity for reform. But can you ever really take politics out of it? I don't know. Why don't we write a resolution that says we should do away with a two-party system and let everybody run as an independent and stand on their own? I think that has as much chance of getting through as this does. So with that, I don't disagree that there should be some reform. I really don't have enough information about One Virginia 2021, who they are, what's their motivation, what their background is. I've read what was presented. So I don't know if there's a political slant to this organization. And that's my fault for not having enough information or seeking enough information. But there's no question, it'd be nice to have lines drawn a little bit better and seats that are contested where the best ideology wins.
Well, I should point out that we don't run as party members. We run as independents, so it can be done. It works. I think it's really important to do this, and it is actually something that's going on in the country. Florida just did a redistricting of the entire state because of it's been so egregious and so bad, and it's reflected. It's happening in Washington. I mean, that's part of the problem. I just read recently this is the worst Congress in terms of business done ever, and there's got to be a direct. The responsibility is the way people are elected. I mean, that's what's been happening. These are the people we send to Washington, and the way we're doing it is obviously not working. So I think we need to do something, and what better place to start it than in Williamsburg?
Thank you. For me, the two words that jump out are transparent and nonpartisan, and I think that's a really important part of this process. So, with that, I'll...
Well, can I
Yes,
just say one
go
more thing?
ahead.
And I take Mr. Pond's point about, do we really know entirely the direction that One Virginia 2021 is going or will eventually go? But what we're supporting here are the goals that are expressed by that group now, and I think that's something that I can fully support.
Yeah.
Would you like to make a motion?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, I move that the city adopt proposed resolution 14-11.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
No.
Mayor Condon.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Our final city manager report is the taxi cab regulation, proposed ordinance 14-21. Jack?
Yes, sir. It's noted in the memo that I gave you. The city received a request from a number of our taxi cab companies to look at a rate increase, and there was some discussion about some of issues such as the trip commencement fee, the waiting time, the extra passenger fee, whether the model year of the cab should be restricted. But there was some difference of opinion on that, but all the companies felt in common that given the length of time that it's been since there has been a rate adjustment, that it was appropriate, and took a look at the regulation of other jurisdictions on the peninsula and saw that ours was below theirs somewhat significantly. So I think it's a reasonable request, and if enacted, this would take the cab rate from what is now 25 cents per 1/7 mile to 25 cents per 1/8 mile, or $2 a mile, and effectively would be a 14.3% increase in that mileage fee. The other fees would remain as they are under this proposal. The last time the council dealt with cab regulation, it allowed that as long as we don't exceed what the other jurisdictions are doing, and the others that regulate our Hampton and Newport News, that the city manager could make that determination without bringing each of these to city council. However, the ordinance now has a set of rates in it, and if we have a set of rates that have been promulgated by the city manager that's different from what it says in the code, that's going to cause confusion. So what particular as drafted by the city attorney, what this ordinance does is take the rates out of the code. However, what I'm telling you is now that the net effect of this would be the increase that I've mentioned. The last thing is also indicated is that this whole area of regulation of the taxi cab industry is under review now by the state. DMV is engaged in a major study, and it will go back to the General Assembly next year. The city has not taken any position with regard to that, and the future of the technology-based transportation companies such as Uber and Lyft that essentially are private vehicles operating under the umbrella of these companies that get their fares by the internet connections. What's going to happen to all of that, we don't know. But we know it's big, it's contentious. It's not, right now in Williamsburg, we haven't seen that. It's happening in the major cities. That's where you see this fight going on, this issue going on. But eventually, it's going to come here as well. So that's in the air as well. So who knows, this time next year, we might not even be in the cab regulation business in local government. We'll see. But for right now, we think this is a reasonable step.
Thanks. Any questions, comments?
I have a question. Do you happen to know what the rates are in Newport News and Hampton?
Yes, we do. And unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me right now.
They are higher than our rates.
Yes,
Right?
yeah. The trip origination fees are higher. They also have some fees that we don't have, and we have some they don't have. We allow for extra person fee. We tend to have trips with a lot of people in the cab going a very short distance. They tend to have longer trips. Of course, they have the airport service that our cab companies can't use. So they are different in their structure.
Any other questions?
No question, but
Yeah.
just my thought. There's two sides of this for me. There's the operator side, who needs to make money, pay their expenses, keep the cab up, and he needs to have the opportunity to raise his rate. And unlike lots of other industries, his is regulated as to where where their rate can go. So I want to try to help them as much as we can. The other side of that is the rider who typically uses a cab is somebody who doesn't own their own car, most likely, and so it's more of a burden on this part of the community that probably can afford it the least. Now, we're maybe not talking about a whole lot of money, but it's an increase to those that can least afford it. It's interesting, as Mr. Tuttle pointed out, and I hadn't thought much about it, we do allow for additional rider fees where other communities don't have that. And I wonder if there isn't a balance between the higher rate in other communities and the ability to charge the higher fee for riders. And so
I'd also mention, too, that the cab company can charge less. So if the market takes them down, they're not required to use this as a cab.
yeah, that's good information.
Judy?
One of the things that strikes me, and I don't know what the best answer is about balancing the needs of the provider and the needs of the consumer, but just thinking about the IRS reimbursement rates, which are basically designed to cover the cost of operating a vehicle, would consume 25% of the new rate, and that doesn't cover the overhead of the company, it doesn't cover the salary of the person who's driving the car, or the cab driver. So, yeah, it does raise the rate, obviously, but to have gone 7 years without any increase, when we know everything else is increasing in cost, seems to be putting a lot of pressure on the provider.
Yeah, and I think that latter point is really important. I mean, we haven't looked at this in a long time, and I think the market's changing, and it's going to change, and right now this seems to me to be a reasonable change, although it does have some impacts.
Although in the interim, we've also increased the amount of public transportation we have. We are trying to meet that problem with bus service, trolley service. So there's a balance there, I'm sure.
I guess if there's one piece of good news, it's that the city of Williamsburg is only so big. You can only go so far on any one trip.
Someone like to make a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that City Council adopt proposed ordinance 14-21.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Jerry, please call the roll, please.
Aye.
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 Next order of business are city attorney reports, and we have two. Chris, the first is adoption of City Code Supplement Number 27.
So periodically, City Council gets these requests to adopt ordinances to update the electronic version of the city code. This one identifies the changes in the code for the last 6 months, and staff recommends that council adopt proposed ordinance 1419.
Okay. Any questions for this is pretty formulaic? Okay. Who would like to make a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move we adopt ordinance number 14-18.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please, Jerry.
Aye.
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 And next is revision to Williamsburg City Code references proposed ordinance 14-20.
This is also housekeeping. We've gone through the city code and reviewed the text against the state code sections to check the references and ensure that all of the references are accurate. We found 4 instances where the references of the state code have changed. The substance of the city code has not required a change as a result. These are typically renumberings of the state code that we haven't yet taken account of because we haven't needed to present an ordinance to council for it. And so staff recommends that in order to make those updates, council adopts proposed ordinance 1420.
Any questions?
They're so controversial.
Mr. Mayor, I recommend the city council adopt proposed ordinance 14-20.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Jerry, call the roll, please.
Aye.
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 We have no unfinished business. Under new business, Paul, yesterday EDA had a discussion about the shopping center. Would you like to give us a brief update and
Sure.
go from there?
Yesterday, prior to the EDA meeting, and following up on our conversation from Monday and our request of staff that they provide additional information on what would be some of the impacts of different approaches to the Williamsburg Shopping Center redevelopment related to city involvement. The mayor suggested that the question be raised to the EDA and get their input. So Ms. DeWitt raised that question to the EDA, and lengthy discussion ensued. It went in a lot of different directions. Some of it was very specific, and it was very difficult to get consensus among the group on anything too specific. But there seemed to be a common thread in the conversation. And again, just to reiterate, I'm not participating in the content of the discussion. I'm just trying to help explain when there are questions or answer those questions or explain policy. What the EDA eventually came up with was the common thread of they felt it was important that the city have some degree of control over the property in order to guide the redevelopment of the property in the way that was in the best interest of the community. There is no definition yet of what control means. That was getting too much into the specifics. So they adopted a resolution that was distributed to council last evening, and at the same time, they agreed to form a subcommittee that would look into some specific options that could be recommended that are related to their general guidance on the matter. And that committee, I believe, will start meeting next week. And just to help anybody who's listening, if I can just read what the EDA said. Given that Williamsburg Shopping Center is one of the most important commercial properties located in Williamsburg, and with time being of the essence, the Williamsburg Economic Development Authority strongly recommends the City of Williamsburg consider immediate steps to control the Williamsburg Shopping Center with the goal of having the private sector ultimately redevelop the property with appropriate attention being given to existing tenants. And then it goes on to say, the Economic Development Authority has formed a subcommittee to provide more detailed recommendations regarding effective mechanisms of control at their next meeting.
So this is part of an ongoing process of trying to look at what are our options and how should we think about this. So I look forward to the EDA's discussion and the subcommittee. Are they scheduled to report back at your next meeting,
Yes, sir.
which is September
10th.
So I think they'll be doing some work, and yeah, all of us will be having lots of input from different directions on this. But again, to the extent staff can help us think about sort of the range of options and how we should think about them, I think that's the point where we are right now. So, any further comments?
I'd just like to emphasize that control does not necessarily mean purchase.
Purchase, right.
And that was a point that they attended to over and over again. I think it's also important to recognize they will just be making a recommendation based upon their collective wisdom and business acumen. And in no way is that binding upon council or does that take the city in any one direction. It's just another avenue of input that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, that we're going to be getting information and suggestions from lots of different directions, this being one of them. Scott, anything?
Yeah, control is a strong word, and it's one that I hope that the subcommittee looks at and maybe takes out, because I don't think that the city, based on anything that I've heard, is in a position to control it in terms of ownership. And I think it's important that the marketplace realizes that they're not competing against the city in purchasing this property. I think a better word may be influencing. How can we help a potential redeveloper, and how can we help them, influence them, help them understand what it is that we see as the value to that as a commercial property, the reason we need commercial there, so that somebody doesn't come with the idea that it could be all residential. And I don't think that's what we want to see happen there. So I think, if anything, we want to be in a position to help influence the future outcome, certainly not control it.
And we certainly, we already do have influence and to some extent control through the zoning ordinance, through the special use permit process and what have you. So in essence, I'm not sure control is the best word, but essentially, I think the influence is going to be critical, because for us this is a critical piece of commercial property in a city that has a limited amount of commercial property.
And I think I take a little bit, stronger stand than that, Doug. I like the word control, and I think one of the issues is that we have been a little too passive in this process with this shopping center. We've got the comprehensive plan. We all bemoan to each other all the time what's been happening at that corner, a major entrance into the city. And yet we're sort of sitting back saying, well, we'll see what these people do. And I would urge the EDA committee to be quite proactive, because I think we need to be. I really do.
No, I think we should be proactive, but to control somebody else's property is strong. And the owner of that property, clearly the one defaulted on his note, and they're in this situation. But I think it's fair to say that the bank that has it now wants to probably spruce it up a little bit, find some new tenants, and then sell it.
That's what we thought they were going to do before.
Well, but I think we can only control it by getting traffic on the streets, so that the marketplace is different, so the shopping center could be something we all want it to be. But again, we're not prepared to invest $75 million, $100 million in redeveloping it ourselves. And so I think we just need to be careful not to muddy the waters for potential suitors for that.
I think the real question for us is, what are the kinds of things that we can do at the margin that can help this move in the direction that we want it to move in? And that's why we are asking the EDA and staff and others to provide us with suggestions and ideas, and then at some point, we will have to sort of say, here's what we're willing to do, and here's what we're not willing to do. But right now, I think we're not at that point right now, and that's why we're looking for this information. So, Michelle, again, and Paul, thank you for being our liaison to EDA. This has become an important body right now, and Michelle, thank you for working with them, and I look forward to what you bring to us. Any further questions, comments? Do we have closed session today, or?
You have
Public
Open
comment?
forum. I'm not looking at my agenda. The final agenda item for today is open forum. Time for anyone who wishes to speak to council on any matter to do so. If you'd like to address council, please come forward and state your name and address. Former Councilman Chohan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor and members of City Council. Mickey Chohan, 129 Berkeley Lane, own Second Street Restaurant. One question that I was going to ask, I know this is usually not a time for Q&A, but under the incentivization program, was hospitality going to include restaurants?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. Also, is this spread out over the entire city?
Yes.
Okay. I'm extremely enthusiastic about an incentivization program. It's been one of the things that I think that the city's lacked for some time, and probably one of the stronger supporters of it. I tried to contact a couple of council members this morning in my hurry that I found out that this was coming before council. I wasn't up on all my late night reading and didn't know this was coming before council today as a final vote. I did catch it on WY Daily, so I appreciate their reporting. That keeps me up and knowledgeable that these things are going on. But I'd be remiss to not say this, and I thought that today there'd be more of a slide presentation of sorts of really the mechanical side on how the program was going to work, because it seemed to some moments lack specificity on how it actually works and how a program gets awarded. And at moments it's so broad and general that it seems somewhat challenging to understand how mechanically it works. But I think from what I gather is that there's this seed pot of money of $250,000 that's there, and I think that the awards that can be placed, if I'm not mistaken, what I just heard is $100,000. So if the pot is $250,000, does that only allow us to invest in possibly 2.5 businesses that move into the area, or is the economic opportunity greater than that? So I guess some of the pieces and parts that I didn't understand mechanically what's available are missing for me that I didn't catch in any sort of presentation.
But Michelle, you might want to address that right now before Mickey goes on. Yeah.
Okay. You want me to?
Yeah, is that okay, Mickey? Do you mind sort of if we answer the questions as they come up? That
I
might
appreciate it, because I know normally this is not the program.
Yeah, no, but this is useful because.
The $100,000 limit is what triggers council's entrance into approval of incentives. Incentives could be anywhere from $0 to $1 to $250,000. And again, there's that 60-year payback.
60 months.
60-month return on investment payback calculation that's going to limit, that's going to set a limit depending on what the business is proposing to do. So there's no, $100,000 is not assumed to be what one business would receive. That's just what would, if something reached that height, that would trigger council's involvement.
Okay. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps immensely. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle.
That encourages me to do possibly another restaurant, because I couldn't do the 60 years. But I did want to point out something that I've experienced in another locality and seemed to make a great deal of sense, because I think the program that is being looked at right now is a program that is, the one term that was used was a deal fund, or also there was kind of the notion that this might help another business stay afloat in that opening window of time when they're trying to get up and running. In the other circumstance of what I've enjoyed incentivization-wise, it's been broken up into regions and localities and into zones. So instead of having maybe this opportunity available on Duga-Gloucester Street where they might not need the vibrancy, it was maybe made on Capitol Landing Road or the Monticello corridor that we're trying to revitalize. So the way that we have it now, it could be, monies could be spent in areas that we don't really necessarily need it. So the lack of the structure of what I'm saying is somewhat challenging. The other incentivization program is predicated on revenue receipts. It's predicated on FTE, full-time employment equivalencies, how many jobs are being generated. So there's matrices, and then that falls down into a reward compensation payback. It can be done over 5-10 years, however long or however little, but there's some matrices in there in which if you qualify, there's certain dollars back to the business. The other thing which seemed positive in what I've experienced in the past is that those monies paid back are on the backside after the monies have already been collected in the form of taxes. So let's take a property like Tioga Motor Court, that there's nothing there right now and the city's paying the bill. If we sold that, put that into the income producing phase of tax receipts, then what would happen is the city would generate cash flow. And let's just pick an arbitrary number. If the cash flow on that property was $200,000, and let's say the new business were awarded 40% back, then of course the city would make and keep $160,000, and the business would then thus make 40% of that. And so I think the point being is if there's some mutual interest to try to generate and be successful, and then of course if the city were to generate the monies on the front end and award that back on the backside, but there's certain measurements and matrices that have to be met in order to make that award happen. The other thing that is a pretty neat program and a part of what I'm involved in now is that one of the stipulations is that you have to give back to the community. As a business owner that would get 40% back has an option of either giving back to a qualified charitable organization that is under the city's roster, 5% or 10% back. That's one of the qualifying criteria. The interesting element about that is it allows the business to start a bridge relationship with one of those organizations, and then also it lessens the dependency of some of these organizations on city funding. So you're building not only infrastructure and income into the city, but you're also you're lessening the dependency of the charitable organizations that normally come to the city for funding. You're creating a different streamline of money in a relationship. So I think there's some things that maybe we have, a restaurant term, maybe haven't finished baking the cake yet, and it just need a little bit more time to bake. So I'd hope that maybe this could get worked on and fleshed out a little bit more so, because I get a sense and a feeling that currently right now we're advancing money to a probable business or a maybe would-be business that we'd loan this money to, that if they weren't able to get off the ground and it wasn't financially stable, we can claw back, but if the business is broke, you're not going to claw back anything, and then it's a real hassle, for the city. So anyhow, just a couple FYIs. I'm apologetic that I didn't get the information earlier. I'm sure it's out there. I just didn't get it, but I appreciate the time and all that you do for the city of Williamsburg. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mickey. And a couple things in response. One, I think the idea that target factors include things like corridor improvements and added value to city vibrancy begin to address sort of those particular areas where we might. So I think the program has built in some flexibility to take into account some of the things you've talked about now. I think, too, Michelle, if you'll correct me or not, this is a first step. And I think, as we gain experience and what have you, I would expect this program will change as we gain experience with it and what have you, and other dimensions may be brought into it. But I think EDA felt, and I feel pretty comfortable that this is a good first step for the city to get into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else wish to address City Council? Any matter? If not, now I think we have.
Mr. Mayor, I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning city manager annual evaluation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Ms. Walton, call the roll, please.
Aye.
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 We'll take a 5-minute recess and come back into closed session.